Hold on to your hats, guys. This is where it gets awesome.
Okay.
You definitely have the knowledge.
I definitely have the knowledge, yeah. Allison, one of the benefits of being the producer / editor / person who sits across the table from you, your podcast bro.
Ew. No.
Your podcast brother? Your
cute buddies.
your cute cat. I sometimes have the foreknowledge to know what you're going to talk about later.
Yes, you do.
And if any of the listeners are in the death care industry, funeral director, death adjacent in any way,
right,
they're going to want to stick around for this entire episode, because at the end, I know that you make a very astute observation, and it is mind-blowing.
He's overselling it a little bit. It's cool, but I don't know. He's playing it fast and loose with mind-blowing.
Stick around. Okay, so I'll count you in for this episode?
Sure.
Okay, episode 6. 5, 4, 3, 2...
Welcome, and thank you for being here on this episode of DEATHinitely, the show that takes death seriously so you don't have to. I'm your host, Allison Danger, your internet death daddy, your cranial crypt keeper, and your posthumous paradoxical pirate. I'm on a quest to learn everything about death and pass that knowledge along to you at the Death Dissertation of Life, the scholastic slideshow for your ears. Today's episode is about phantom fandom, or death as a fandom. With me, as always, is producer, editor, Jordan. Hey,
Hi.
Jordan.
Hi, sorry, I said it. I jumped the gun and said hi before you said my name. Allison, before we start, today's episode is extra fun, and I want to tell the audience why it's extra fun. It's because we went mobile.
Oh, yeah.
We are actually recording outside today on Lake Simcoe.
Yes.
On the boat, and we are enjoying sun, fresh air, the complete opposite of what you would think about when you think about death culture.
It's our vacation episode.
It's okay, Allison, sorry for cutting you off. I just want
vacation.
I just want people to know that we're not stuck in the house and we're not stuck in the recording studio being like, listen to another episode of DEATHinitely.
We're stuck in the boat.
We're in the boat.
Recording the podcast saying listen to DEATHinitely.
Next time we should do it in the backyard at a picnic table.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Go ahead, Allison. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Trigger warning. DEATHinitely is a show that talks about death. Over the course of the episode, you'll hear me talk to comic artist and creator The Becca about her relationship with the use of death in her art and her gothic style.
Online, I go as The Becca, and that's my art name as well. I got it during high school from friends. We had our own designated hallway, the Freak Hall, so we're the spooky goth kids and weirdos hung out. But anyway, we are also the spooky kids too, obviously. Goths. Yeah, so I'm a comic book artist and writer. I have a book called Gehenna Death Valley. It's a Joe Shuster award-winning book. And I'm also writing the Wormhole Club Tragedy. I also do some illustrations on the side, and I occasionally dabble in variant cover artwork. And you can find my work on thebecca.com, and all the socials should be on there as well.
Allison, today's episode is about death and fandom and gothic culture.
Yeah.
What is that?
This is something I didn't actually realize existed, even after working in the death care industry as an embalmer for almost 20 years. Working in death care and around death, it's a common thing for me, but it never really feels mundane. Even after being around more than 10,000 bodies, each death I encounter is impactful in some way. Not every single one is profound or emotional, but there is something that each of those dead bodies can teach me, or an experience I can learn while helping them maintain their autonomy in death.
One thing that I know about you, Allison, is that in all the years that you've been in the death care industry, is that you take it very seriously.
So you don't have to.
So, oh Christ, I completely forgot that that's basically the tagline for the show.
Yeah.
he caught me.
I threw him off.
Yeah, you really.
He's not very often speechless, ladies and gentlemen.
So when you said that the idea that the death culture didn't exist until recently, I find very interesting. Can you help me explain that a bit more?
Sure. People personify death to help understand it. People pray to death gods across the expanse of time, space, and religion. People fear or revere death as an existential point in the life cycle, regardless of their or your faith. But I said all that to say this. I didn't realize that there was a distinct group of people who are fans of death and the death aesthetic. They subscribe to a death-centric culture and expression. I mean, there were quote-unquote goths in my high school, but I didn't equate their anti-establishment mentality and attitude to being a fan of death or death culture. Not that they want to die or are actively seeking it out, but that people enjoy and prescribe to things that surround death and the culture it drags along with it. How did I miss this? This never occurred to me that people would appreciate death as an objective fandom in ways you might associate fandoms with sports teams, celebrities, media IPs, and other properties. Side note, I wouldn't classify myself as a death fan. I would say that I'm a death academic. Is there a difference? Yes, but more on that later. I don't have many pieces of dark clothing or aspire towards a death aesthetic. I don't have a house decorated to mimic the Victorian era, and I didn't name my dog Cerberus. I do have a full-size human skeleton replica, but it's been modified to look like the Marvel character Wolverine's adamantium skeleton with some faux World War II dog tags that read James Howlett. I'm a comic and pop culture fan and a death academic. A death-ademic. Here's more with the Becca. So can you talk a little bit more about why you're drawn towards the dichotomy between light and dark or living and death, or why that's so prominent in some of your work?
I think it's part of it is from the environment I grew up in. So at home life, I was raised in a conservative Christian upbringing. So there's it's the side of it that's the fundamentalist side. It's always like death is bad and everything, you strive for everything good and all that, and everything that was bad was forbidden. Like, for example, like Halloween was banned in the house. It was under good intentions, but then by the time, high school, getting older, and that was when I started to explore more about horror. And I was already into fantasy, like The Lord of the Rings, and also murder mysteries. Which is weird. It's like horror's banned, but murder mysteries, that's totally fine. And through the murder mystery genre, it's also a gateway into slashers, oddly enough. Like it's interesting how these subgenres link in together. And then also with The Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of dark moments in there that I don't know what it is. It's just so fascinating for me. And I don't know if it's part of it is the melancholy side of my brain, like genetics. I don't know, maybe those two influences might play a part of it. And then other things, when I was young, about 8 years old, I saw Phantom of the Opera on stage, and it left a huge impression on me. And to this day, it's still my favorite musical ever. And just the set designs and how visual memory I have is of people coming down being hanged. And I was like, that is so creepy, but it just never left you. And I don't know what it is, but I think the light and dark is my way of balancing the two out, right? It's like, while I consider myself, yes, I'm into horror and the dark, all the dark things, but you need that balance, sometimes when I'm working on like some pretty dark stuff, I'll have a comedy playing in the background. Just
keep yourself centered.
Yeah, exactly. Just keeping centered, because you can't be like that all the time, because it's draining.
Firstly, let's dig into the idea of fandom and what exactly that means before we extrapolate it and imply it to death. People being a part of a fandom or being a fan of something is to say that you follow a set of rules that make you stand out as liking a particular thing. Being a fan is a proxy for identity. We build parts of our aesthetic, the gathering places we attend, the relationships we cultivate, and parts of our personality around what we love outside of ourselves. Think about a popular type of fandom like a sports fandom. Particularly, think about a fan you know or have encountered who is part of a professional ice hockey fandom. Even more specifically now, think about the Toronto Maple Leafs fans. How do you know about their participation in this fandom? Do they wear a Maple Leafs player's jersey? Do they have social interactions online with things like fantasy leagues? Do they buy Leafs merch? Do they go to games and congregate with other fans? Do they go to bars with acquaintances and watch the games? Do they have friends over to watch the game? Do they say, quote, "We lost again," unquote, when the team loses, aligning themselves as part of the team even when they've never worn skates before? Do they have emotional outbursts related to the successes and failures of Leafs play? The Leafs haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967 and are still the most lucrative team in the NHL as of 2023. Being a Leafs fan is not about them being the best, or at least the winningest. Side note, different types of fandom have different qualities that radiate from their fandom and how it impacts its fans. Sports fandom has a higher rate of placemaking impacting their fandom than a music or media fandom experience. If you'd like to get into the nitty-gritty of fandom and how it works, seek out Meredith Levine, certified and educated fanthropologist who studies and consults on all things fan. Once again, speaking with the Becca.
Yeah. And then the other side of my family too, like you've got the religious side, and then I also have members who work in the medicine. So there's a physio and a nurse in the family, and my great grandmother was a doctor.
Cool.
In Aurora, she had her own practice there. So just having the science side, even more so balance out that upbringing when I was younger, and just having a better understanding of science and death is part of life. It's the natural life cycle,
Right.
Allison, as you were talking about people, specifically hockey fans, Leafs fans, getting together, watching the game, friends coming over, watching the game, I was thinking about, because we're talking about people that are a fan of death culture,
Right.
and fans of death. Do people who are fans of in this culture, do they go to like funerals and hang out?
I don't think so.
Okay,
You kind of get found out, right? Like there's not a public place where you can congregate that I know of about those things. I mean, maybe there's certain different kinds of groups. Maybe they seek out different like funeral or death aligned social interactions, but I've never had a funeral crashed by a death fan before. No, I think they're smart enough and appropriate enough to not cross that line.
Okay, fair enough. You're the person I would ask.
Right.
You're the deathspert.
We got to come up with a new handle.
Here's more with the Becca.
When you say you kind of grew up and you were the goth kids at school or anything like that, would you ever have considered yourselves in your group of friends or your artwork or the way you portray yourself as a fan of death?
I don't know how to answer this question because I don't see it as fandom, but more an intrigue or just, I don't know, it's something, being raised to be afraid of. Like I even had a weird time period around the same time I saw Phantom. I was afraid of skeletons because I think that clicked in that this is part of the human body. And I thought it was a monster for some reason,
Right.
But just not understanding human anatomy and all that. I don't know. I think it's just more of a morbid curiosity and just the desire to learn more about it, just undoing that harmful teaching of being afraid of it. And I don't think it should be something that should be feared. It's just understood.
Now, how exactly would you classify death as a fandom? A great question for a fanthropologist. Great handle, which I am not, but I am a death expert, or deathspert, which doesn't have the same awesome ring to it as fanthropologist. Deathspert sounds super gross, so we're going to find me a new handle.
We'll find you one.
Yay. Well, the study of being a fan of something at a research or academic level is still a burgeoning idea of the social sciences. There are some widely held theories about different types of fandoms, fan hierarchy systems, and how particular subcultures behave, and psychological analysis of some of those subcultures work. From a historical point of view, you could say fanboying for death started modernly in the Victorian era, which was, as far as architecture is concerned, the era that launched the Neo-Gothic period. So this is probably what you were talking about earlier, Jordan, the modern reinvention of the modern goth. These design notions and cultural styles from Europe heavily influenced the North American attitudes towards death. In the time of puffy sherps,
puffy sherpas, like a sherpa wearing like a puffy shirt. That's
like a Lestat shirt.
What about that's a cross pollination of culture.
A mountain climber wearing a Victorian era puffy shirt, like a vampire.
A vampire sherpa.
Oh, a vampire sherpa. Now we got it.
That's it.
They take the people up the hill to kill them,
drain them of their blood,
and that's why they're scattered across the Himalayas.
Whoa! But no, what if it's real life?
Sherpa.
What if Big Mountain is trying to stop us?
Big mountain climber.
They're hiding it because there's that one spot in the highest mountain. What's the highest mountain called? Everest. Where people tend to die and they leave the bodies as markers. Yeah. So maybe
this is a horror movie. This is
it's real life.
It's Big Mountain climbing is not behind the vampire.
Mountain is trying to stop us.
No,
it's actually a way for vampires to get their food. And it's just a giant fridge. I'm just saying it's Big Mountain. Big Mountain is against
Big
us.
Mountain is the reason that vampires are not in the open.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Side note.
Vampires. In the time of puffy shirts and macabre settings, Memento Mori teeth rings, and Edgar Allan Poe, the North American death fandom was really starting to take off. But how did we get from Edgar Allan Poe and the Raven to Brandon Lee and the Crow? Side note. The raven and the crow are both corvids. This is a group of birds that eats carrion, which is a nicer way to say dead flesh. Another bird famous for this is the vulture. Ravens, crows, and other corvids have long been associated with death as either a symbol of it, an omen, or a messenger from the underworld. Maybe this will help direct us to where on the fan spectrum death fandom would fall. It definitely is a telltale heart type reason that modern goths or death fans aspire towards the styles that pull from that period, adopting a romanticized or even in some cases sexualized love of the ideation of death.
Allison, where does death fit? Like, how does the death fandom align with our major fandom groups and practices?
So the goth aesthetic or the death fandom can be described as something eerie, mysterious, complex, or exotic. A dark romanticism that blurs the lines between sex and death. That is a way to see the world, but also be seen by the world. Embracing the dichotomy between life and death, love and loss. Traditionally, you could break modern fandoms into three major categories. Those categories are sports fandom, media fandom, and music fandom. The media category has a lot of subclassifications though, like literature, movies, IPs, TV and streaming, or celebrities. Music and sports fandom are relatively straightforward, although you could argue that footy, soccer, and football, American NFL football, those type of fans are vastly different on a psychological scale. The same could be said of the Spice Girls fan versus a group of metalheads. Both part of the music fandom groups, but vastly different in many regards as how they practice and preach their specific fandom. On the outside, death fandom might appear to fit into the media fan group. Although it's a life event, it could be argued that death could operate like an intellectual property, an IP, like a celebrity or a literary character. Check out the Death Personified episode about all the ways we've personalized death historically and in the media. We love to turn things into humanized versions of itself, and death is no exception. When you do a little digging, you can find out that death culture and death fandom was really born out of the late 70s and early 1980s music scene. Coming hot on the heels of the punk rock period, the goth music movement was characterized by trance-like music with dark themes mixed with rock. Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi's Dead is cited as the song that launched a long-living music genre titled goth rock, filled with dank thematics and leaned on the anti-establishment ideas of the earlier punk rock scene.
Allison, I want to interrupt you really quick here again, because you talked about dank thematics and not dark thematics.
It's a quote from Kurt Loder when he interviewed some of these people. Back at this time,
because when someone says dank, I think like musky, like you say a dank dark basement, right? Mm-hmm. So I think of like a musky thick air sort of thing. So when you say dark thematics when added with music, mm-hmm. I've never heard those two things put together.
Which is a really interesting thing for you to pick up on, because a lot of these bands and goth music started in very fringe basement style clubs in New York City. So they were dank in the sense that you just described it.
So the type of music that I listen to all sorts of different music, but typically I lean heavily towards female vocalists like Celine Dion.
Or pop. It's gonna be me.
Avril Lavigne I listen to as well, but I would never classify any of the music I listen to as dank.
No, you're not a dank music listener.
Dank, that's good, man. That's really good.
So you can find the link to some of the music, particularly Bela Lugosi's Dead, in the show notes below. Another prominent gothic icon was Susie Sue of Susie Sue and the Banshees. In a time when music videos were becoming more popular, this also meant that a lead singer's style, which was rife with what is now recognized as gothic or the goth aesthetic items and look, it was popularized across the television and the MTV watching world. Side note, Susie Sue and the Banshees' cover of Iggy Pop's song The Passenger was really great, as was a lot of their catalog. But dang, I fell in dark love with their rendition of Spellbound. It's rumored that Mr. Pop likes Susie Sue's version of The Passenger better than his own. These bands, along with the 1983 vampire movie The Hunger, with the always awesome David Bowie, alongside Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon, solidified the look, or what is now referred to as the goth aesthetic. It makes perfect sense as to why the modern goth or death enthusiast is drawn to the occult, the universal horror movie icons, and part of that TV and movie genre. While the modern goth often leans more towards the Victorian styles married with contemporary flair, the Victorians were noted for following strict mourning culture through dress. At the same time, women of this time were expected to follow procedural dressing rules if their family member or spouse died for lengthy periods of time. The modern death fan wears corsets and black lace gowns reminiscent of an era where those items were common, just like someone would wear a sports jersey to the local club's game. There have been some carryover from European cultures in Canada that dictate a widow wear a black shawl or scarf over their head during the funeral of their spouse. I've seen this several times in my work in Canada, but it's also found in pop culture, like in the Disney movie Encanto. The grandmother character wears a black shawl throughout the movie, until the climax of the story about the loss of her husband is made known to the watcher, and more importantly, her granddaughter Maribel. Abuela fondly removes her black cloak after relieving herself of the guilt of her husband's death, and is able to move forward in her grief. So in this regard, the birth of the goth and death fandom was a direct descendant of the music scene, and could be easily aligned to the music fandom group as well. While I'd love to find some clever way to say that the fandom of death aligns or has similarities with the sports fandom group as well, even I don't know death well enough to find that through line, but give me some time. Maybe death needs its own group and doesn't fit cleanly into one of these three already established and studied fandom groupings or subgroups. It does, after all, stand alone as something we might not all subscribe to, but cannot avoid. Not all of us will play hockey in our lives, but we sure will all die. On that happy note, but you know what? We sure will all die.
I was preparing for the next portion of the podcast.
Right.
And I wasn't looking at you when you said, but we sure will all die. So I was following along with the notes that you had created so that I can properly do my editing and producing.
Right. Yeah.
And I wasn't looking at you. And then I'm like,
What?
Why isn't she talking? Why isn't she saying the next line? And then you go, well, on another note. Caught me off guard.
I know.
A little more the Becca on this episode.
Do you find that in the artwork that you do, that it draws to you people that are like-minded? Like, is it a community building tool as well to seek out like-minded people in like the horror community or in a gothic aesthetic? Or do you find that they gravitate towards you and you can create a community around that at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I just love, my favorite things with going to conventions or events like, the Wayside Creator Spotlight, just having like-minded people come by to the table and they're drawn to what I'm making. And it's what I love about being an artist and making work that connects with people. It's such a huge win because it's like, oh, there's someone else going through or has similar thoughts to what I have. And it's not just about me. It's like some interesting conversations that happen with those interactions.
Yeah.
And then weirdly enough, and most of my interactions have been positive, but it's attracted work from a few religious types.
Right.
So I don't know how it gets out there, but they're feeling like I'm very careful to not target any specific group with my work. And I try to keep it away from those circles, but somehow it winds up there and then they're kind of, oh, I worry about you, or I'm offended by this or something. And it's like, okay, you don't have to look at it.
I didn't ask you to be here though.
Yeah. So that's also interesting too. This is more of a recent development. So just having the mostly positive with like-minded people, and then the other side, which is like, what are you doing? And noticing mostly it's a patriarchal reaction to it. Yeah. And I don't know why that is. So it's just, I'm looking at it as a study, studying human behavior and studying
for sure.
that conservative side of it that wants to suppress those topics.
Or in some like messed up kind of version, we have to save her, she's going in a direction like, Bud, lay off. I didn't ask for any of that.
Yeah. My work's been called demonic, for example. And so I'm just like, okay, well, it's not for you. So it's interesting. It's like, this has nothing to do with demons at all. So it's just interesting how different people react to.
But I think that's a really good thing from an artistic point of view, is that to me, part of the artistic process is to elicit an emotional reaction. So whether it's that positive space where people feel comfortable to explore something that's maybe a little more taboo, or explore, their thoughts and feelings about it, you create a safe space for that vast majority of people who you interact with. But maybe that comes from a place of fear with these people, is that they're not comfortable exploring that, and your art presents that to them. My next question it's kind of related. The psychological toll of making horror-driven art or gothic art. Would you say that it is more self-comforting and a way to express those emotions, or does it take a toll on you emotionally?
There is a psychological toll sometimes. Like, I would say Wormhole Club Tragedy has more of a psychological toll because I'm touching on things with religion with that one, or decompressing or deconstructing my religious upbringing and teachings with that one. Where Gehenna Death Valley was more of like That one was more motivated by my arachnophobia, fear of spiders. But that one was more, both are therapy, but Gehenna was not a psychologically taxing one. It was just like, my mind was like, let's make this into a monster movie.
Right.
And just go with it. And with Wormhole Club, I'm trying to have like the fun with it. And I think it's there. But I think it was around the second and third issue, I had such a hard time writing those ones just to get through what I'm trying to say, but trying to hide what I'm saying. So again, just the hard part of not directing at one group specifically.
Right.
And also trying to write the psychological horror parts of it too, which has been a good challenge versus, just writing about monsters in the previous. But overall, there's more pros than cons. It's such a weight that's gone from my head. Or there's got to be a better idiom for that or expression for that. It's cathartic for sure.
But you know what there isn't? Studies done on the fandom of death or death-centric subculture. Looks like the host of DEATHinitely, Allison Danger, has her work cut out for her. Psychological or sociological research notwithstanding, it appears that being a fan of death is exactly the paradox the name would suggest. While being a part of any fandom can be a way to help with things like self-expression, self-care, building a like-minded community, mood regulation, and safe space emotional exploration, the death-centric fandom is based on a group identity of wanting to be different. A paradox. It has also adopted the idea of romanticizing death. Another paradox. I've heard it be referred to as being the villain and the valiant, two opposite sides of the same coin. Again, a paradox. I find this outward expression of the embrace of death-centric culture in permanent body modifications particularly interesting at the academic level. After working in the death care industry for 20 years, it has been drilled into me that I need to appear clean-cut, with moderate hair, jewelry, and makeup, with no visible tattoos, piercings, or body modification. Most funeral directors or embalmers you encounter will look more like an airline attendant than a member of the Addams family. So why is it that people who are surrounded by death on a daily basis in an involved and intimate way do not exude that in their aesthetic? The conclusion I came to is this. Those who work in the death care space need to appear to be a blank canvas. Hold on to your hats, guys. This is where it gets awesome. In a family's time of need, they want to come in and paint the canvas with their ideas, memories, wants, and need, and not be subject to an outside influence. If the canvas is already half painted with personal bias, aesthetic, or subculture, it can have a psychological impact on the willingness of the family you are serving to feel at ease.
Damn, that's good. You have made an amazing observation.
I'm glad.
It blows me. This is absolutely mind-blowing, and I never would have thought of that in a million years, because A, I'm not a deathspert, and B, I'm not as brilliant as you, and I think this is an amazing observation, Elsa, and I think you really deserve kudos for this.
Thanks.
No problem.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong, or that it needs to change or stay the same, but what I'm saying is that my personal choices for my own fandoms aren't able to transcend across my personal and professional lines. Would I like to be able to keep my nose ring in every day or not cover my arm tattoos? Sure, but I get why I'm asked to take those things away before I start work.
A little more the Becca on this episode.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I decided to go into comics and write the stuff I do. Just anyone out there who's experiencing these things, just to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like my stuff hopefully it reaches a wider audience, because right now I'm just self-publishing everything going on. But I hope as I go, continue on, that there is a wider audience that has access to my work.
Yeah, I think that's important. You become that centralized location, right? You bring the people around you, and you become that lightning rod that draw people in and say, oh my gosh, somebody else feels that way. And colloquialisms or idioms or whatever, they're there for a reason. And, misery loves company is just another one of them. And it's the same thing. We are bonded by this crappy thing. So a really nice way to continue that community building and like coming around something that, again, horror and death and all of those themes and topics aren't very often discussed or talked about. But then when you add that little bit of personal experience on top of that, I just, it's amazing. It's so great. It's so wonderful that you're able to do it. I'm just floored by it. It's so wonderful.
I don't think I could have done it without the science part of my family, honestly. And that was the side that got me into murder mysteries as well.
Yeah.
The gateway into horror, right? But it was a gateway into talking and being more comfortable with things like death and gothic imagery and all the things dark, you know.
If you want to learn more about this topic, there's a great website called gothicsubculture.com. Link in the show notes, as well as links to all the other sources for today's episode info. If you'd like to know what I'm reading this week, I just finished Piers Anthony's novel On a Pale Horse. The main character is your audience proxy and introduces you to a science and magic-filled world where you are likely to fly on a plane as a carpet. The main character becomes death through an extraordinary circumstance and has to come to grips with all the facets of death as they happen in real time to the people he's there to collect. It was written in 1983, but I feel like it still holds up, and I actually really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Wow, Allison, you're reading something about death? Interesting.
Oh,
Interesting.
big shocker. So what are you working on By the Wayside, Jordan?
I'm also the host of an internet show called By the Wayside, where my job, the mission statement for the show, of course, is to connect the audience to creativity. So we've got a lot of great guests coming up, and I really appreciate that you plugged me a little bit there, Allison. So thank you.
Where can we find By the Wayside, Jordan?
Waysideshow.com, easiest place to find it.
Definitely wants to take death seriously so you don't have to, creating a safe and inclusive space that tackles the mundane, profound, and crazy parts of death that you don't feel like asking anywhere else. Listen, participate, comment, love, learn. I'm just happy you're here. The next episode I'm working on is about the difference between big D death and little d death. What's the difference? You'll have to listen to find out. Deathinitely is an independent show that's recorded on the ancestral homes of several Mississauga and Chippewas First Nations. We honor these Indigenous peoples, ancestors, and future generations on this land that we share with reverence and humility. I've been your host today, Allison Danger, and with me as always is editor and producer Jordan Middlebrook with music by Soundbay. Links to the readings and research materials and citations can all be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. I've been Allison Danger, and this is Deathinitely, the show that takes death seriously so you don't have to. If you'd like to hear more about Deathinitely, or know more about Deathinitely, check out our show notes for all of the social connections and things like citations, links, and other internet noise. You can find us on Instagram at Deathinitely, or on Patreon at patreon.com/Deathinitely, or AllisonDanger.com/Deathinitely. Deathinitely is an independent show and is made possible by generous people like you. If you want to know all the things fun or funny or funeral, please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, or you can join our mint condition, fresh out of the box Patreon for all the show and all the goodies that come with it.
That's a podcast.
Bow, bow.